Yeah. So what's next in polar exploration? I think to answer that question, you have to know a little bit about where are we coming from. And I'd like to start with one of the old explorers, Roald Amundsen. And he planned a trip to the North Pole for years, only to learn that Robert Peary just had snatched it. But what did Amundsen do? He was fooling everyone. He was planning a trip to the North Pole and then secretly doing the opposite. He was wanting to go to the South Pole. And by doing that, obviously, he had to succeed. And as I guess most of you know, 14th of December in 1911, he stood at the South Pole and had made it. And he simply just had to succeed. And with both the poles conquered, I think the scene was set for the future of polar exploration, which was about doing something new, to be first, doing something that has never been done before. And I think that has always been a driving force, both in science and adventure, both geographically, physically, and mentally. And I have... And those days was really the golden age of polar expeditions, and not much had really changed when I did my first expedition in 1986. And that was across Greenland. And back in those days, I was still using cotton and wool. We were still navigating with sextant to find our position, so it was more or less the same as it was back in the old days, except that now it was possible to fly there and back. But in the early 90s, something started to change, and you had the introduction with the GPS. I actually bought my first GPS in 1990, and it was a big, bulky Trimble. It was a military version of the Trimble, and it was too big to use in the field or on the way. You just had to use it in the tent. And the price of that GPS was $10,000 in 1990 dollars. So, but you can know where you were, and 10 years later, you had the introduction of satellite phones. You could call with the Iridium phones, both from the North and the South Pole. Equipment became lighter and better, and you became faster due to that. And there was also generally a bigger interest in polar expeditions from the 19s. And I have myself been fortunate to do a few trips and also be a part of that race in the 90s. I did some solo expeditions, skiing solo to the North Pole, solo to the South Pole, solo across the North Pole, and also solo across Antarctica, to mention a few of the trips that I have done. And the way I see the future of polar exploration is that, at least for adventure, you know, science and climate, that's a separate topic. But for adventure, you know, there just takes so much more to raise eyebrows nowadays. There's so much going on, so many expeditions going on. So I think that we will see harder, more demanding, more solo, more winter expeditions, so much more extreme expeditions in the years to come. And just to give you a little hint of how intense some of these trips can be, I want to share with you some stories from the latest trip I did, which was with Mike Horn across the North Pole in the dark. And a trip with Mike Horn is, for some reason, always dangerous, but this trip was special. It was really, really on the limit. And what we wanted to do on this expedition was not only just to cross the ice cap of the North Pole. We wanted to do it from one continent to another. So we wanted to start here in Nome and sail into the Polar Ocean, get dropped off at the ice edge, ski across the North Pole to the ice edge north of Svalbard, and sail all the way to Tromsø. And when we started on this trip, we really left everything behind. We started in the end of August 2019 from Nome in Alaska with Mike's boat Pangea, which is really one of the most impressive expedition platforms out there today, and sailed into the Arctic Ocean. And we had very good satellite information, but the problem is that the time it takes from the satellite takes that image and until you can download it on board the boat, that landscape has totally changed. So even if we knew there were passages and open water around us, we got stuck again and again. So that trip with the boat was, in a way, an expedition in itself, really. But what we did was to put people up in the mast, because on the top of that 35-meter-high mast, we could see where the ice was thin and where there was narrow gaps, so we could push that boat through.
5 degrees to starboard! You can go over this. We must break through here.
And this way we actually managed to get all the way up to 85 degrees and 30 minutes north, further north than any boat of this kind ever have sailed, actually. And Mike and I, we started from Pangea, 12th of September, and already then it had started to freeze up, and 23rd of September the sun goes down at the North Pole for the last time. And that meant that temperature would drop and we would soon be engulfed in darkness. And about 2 months of this trip was in darkness with headlamps, and everything just becomes so much more difficult when it's dark. It's difficult to find safe routes, but the worst, I think, is the mental part. You are just engulfed in this darkness for 24 hours, for weeks on end. And even if there were two of us, it was kind of a lonely trip, simply because the sled and the equipment we had to pull was just so heavy. We had food for 85 days on this expedition, and the sled weighed 190 kilos. So it was just like being in the gym for 10 hours for 3 months, and that doesn't make you stronger. It actually makes you weaker. So it happened that we actually didn't speak to each other for a whole day, just because it just took all our energy to get that load moving forward. The cold is actually, in a way, good, because it makes the ice stronger and thicker, but when it drops to -40 and below, the cold is also a fierce enemy, and we did get a lot of frostbites, and nothing really heals when you push your body as hard as we did on this expedition. And the only thing we wanted to do when we got into the tent was to get into the sleeping bag and get some comfort and some warmth, but since there was no sun to wick out the moisture, everything was just icing up. So before we could even think about that sleeping bag, we had to spend at least 1 hour just brushing our equipment free from snow and ice.
So this is how we sit and brush our equipment every day.
Yeah, well, this is the moment that the real job starts. The tent is where you have to prepare for tomorrow. If you're not prepared for tomorrow, you're not going to survive the expedition. Every day you have to start brand new.
It's a little bit different than Africa, huh? And as you know, I guess it's no surprise that not everything goes according to plan on a trip like this. There's always something that goes wrong. And after we passed the North Pole and we're heading south, the first thing that happened was that my sled broke. And it was just completely crushed in the front, and I had to spend 5 hours trying to repair this sled with my bare hands in that tent. That's the most difficult repair I have ever done, I think, and we were just so dependent on those sleds. And the second thing that happened was that we got hammered with storms, with winter storms, bad weather coming from the south, and actually pushing us back again. And it was a little bit depressing waking up in the tent, and then you see on your GPS that everything you'd skied the day before was lost to drifting back the same way you came from. We were basically beyond any kind of rescue on this expedition. There was no airplanes that would land up there in the winter, and it's just too far away from anything. And when we saw that our rations just got smaller and smaller inside the sled, we were really, really fighting for our lives at the end of this expedition. And that's when you start to look like this guy here, which is actually me. On one of the last days on this expedition, I was actually filming with my infrared camera, because I had this infrared camera, and that camera could see in the dark and also see the temperature difference and see where the ice was safe enough. And that white spot is actually open water. And then I saw Mike coming into the picture, and suddenly he disappeared. And then I knew what had happened. He had fallen through the ice in that icy cold water. And when that happened, I thought that this is it, this is the end of the expedition. And I just dropped everything, and I knew that if I fell into we would probably both have died. And somehow I managed to help him up, and then that long process of trying to regaining control started, but that was a really, really close call. And then with all this happening, it's hard to describe the feeling I had when we saw the light of people, the first light of people after nearly 3 months on this expedition, or when we saw we saw these guys here. It's our friends who had left the ship to come and greet us out there on the ice. You could actually see the ship that was waiting for us at the ice edge there, and they had left the ship to come forward to greet us. That feeling to meet those people, to meet those friends, is one of the strongest feelings I had in my whole life, and I'll let Mike sum it up here.
It's an emotional moment, because it's for the first time, like I told Børge, we see the boat become bigger as we approach it. Pangaea we saw become smaller as we left it. And we dreamt of this moment for nearly 90 days. And through all the hardship, we had our last ration today, and we do this crossing unsupported.
And the reason we made this trip, we actually made this, reached the ship on the last day of food. Actually, we were 2 days of overtime, so after 87 days, we reached the ship. I had 1 lunch bag and a half a liter of fuel left in my sled. But the reason we made it is because we believed that we could do it. And we believed that we were the guys who could pull this off, and we trusted each other. I put my life in the hands of Mike Horn, and we had focus on each other's strong sides. If there was something Mike was better at than me, fine, then he took the lead in that field. Or if there was something else I knew more about, I took the lead in other areas. So that was really what drove this expedition forward. And this was very, very intense from start to finish, which in one way is good, because it's those memories you will remember when you're lying there and looking back. But I'm not sure if I will recommend anyone to try the same as we did here. But if you could do that, if you can work together, if you can believe in what you're doing, and if you can prepare well and just not giving up, I think there is still a future for strong polar expeditions in the years to come. So thank you very, very much.